You are sitting at your desk at work. It is a Tuesday afternoon, maybe a Wednesday. Honestly, the days have started to blur a little. You have a decent job, you pay your bills, you have health insurance, a 401k you barely look at, maybe a little savings. By most measures, things are fine. But fine is not the same as good, and deep down you know that. There is this thought that keeps coming back. Not every day, but often enough. What if I just did my own thing? What if I built something? What if I stopped trading 40 or 50 hours of my week for a paycheck and actually created something that was mine? And every time that thought shows up, something else follows right behind it. You think about the money it would take, the time you do not have, the experience you feel like you lack. You think about people who have built successful businesses and assume they had something you do not: capital, connections, the right background, a business degree, a safety net. So the thought fades. You go back to the emails, back to the meetings, back to the routine that pays you just enough to stay in it. Here's the question I want to sit with you on today. Why do people who genuinely want to build something different spend years thinking about it and still never start? Not because they are lazy, not because the idea is bad, but why does the starting part feel so impossibly far away? I want to hold on to that for a while, because by the end of this, I think the answer is going to change how you look at the whole thing. The version of entrepreneurship that most people picture looks like this. You have an idea, you write a business plan, you need funding, you pitch investors or apply for a loan, you hire people, you scale, you grind for years before it pays off. Maybe it never does. That story exists, but it is not the only story, and it is definitely not the most common one. There is another version, one that has been happening quietly for years, mostly without being talked about in business school or celebrated on magazine covers. Regular people, teachers, designers, photographers, cooks, consultants, travelers, mechanics, who looked at something they were already good at and figured out how to turn it into income. Not a startup with venture funding, not a side hustle waiting to die, a real, sustainable business built from skills they already had for a few $100s or less. A book called The $100 Startup spent years collecting those stories. Real people, real numbers, real businesses, not exceptions, patterns. And when you look at what all of those people actually did, something becomes very clear. The barrier was never what they thought it was, and it is probably not what you think it is either. Let me start here, because this is the part that most people miss. When you think about starting something, the first instinct is to figure out what you need that you do not currently have. More money, more time, more knowledge, a better idea. And so the plan becomes get those things first, then start. But here is what actually happened in hundreds of real cases. People started with what they had, not after getting more, with what they had right now. A woman who had spent years as an event planner for a company started doing it independently for small businesses. A guy who had always been into cycling started a tour company using a single bike. Someone who cooked well and liked helping people started a small catering side operation out of their home kitchen. None of them waited until conditions were perfect. None of them had a lot of money. Most of them started for under $1,000, some for under $200. The thing they had in common was not money or timing. It was that they stopped looking for what they lacked and started asking a different question. What do I already know how to do, and who would pay for that? This sounds simple, but I want you to actually sit with it for a second, because it is genuinely different from how most people think about starting something. Most people are looking for an idea, a special concept no one has thought of, something unique. And they keep searching and searching, and nothing feels original enough, so they never start. But the businesses in those stories were not built on original concepts. They were built on useful skills applied to a specific person's problem. That is it, not novelty, usefulness. And you have useful skills. You probably have more than you realize because skills you use regularly start to feel ordinary to you. They feel like things everyone knows, but they do not. The things that come naturally to you took other people years to figure out, and some of them never do. Think about that. Now, there is a piece of this that gets a little more specific, and this is where things start to shift. A skill on its own is not a business. Plenty of people are skilled at things and never earn a dollar from it. The business only exists when that skill intersects with something a real person needs solved. Those are two different things. Here's an example. Say you are good at organizing. You have always been the kind of person who builds systems, keeps things clean, structures your environment in a way that makes everything easier. That is a skill. It is real, but on its own, it is not a business. Now you look at who needs that skill. Maybe small business owners who are drowning in paperwork. Maybe people going through a move or a transition who feel overwhelmed. Maybe remote workers whose home office has become chaos. Now you have something, because now the skill is connected to a real problem a real person is willing to pay to have solved. The gap between those two things, what you can do and what someone else needs, that is where the actual opportunity is. Most people skip this step. They either focus entirely on the skill without thinking about who it serves, or they try to create a product before checking whether anyone actually wants it. Both of those paths lead to frustration. The shortcut, if there is one, is to start with the person, not the idea, not the skill, the person. What is the specific struggle they're having? What would make their life meaningfully easier? And then work backward from there to figure out if what you know lines up with what they need. I've seen people do this in a weekend. Not perfectly, but enough to start testing. Here is the part that makes most people uncomfortable. You are never going to feel ready. I want to say that clearly because it is one of the most quietly damaging beliefs about starting something. The idea that readiness is a state you arrive at after enough preparation. It is not. Readiness comes from doing the thing, not before it. Think about the first time you got better at anything in your life. Driving, cooking something difficult, a job you were nervous about starting. You did not feel confident on day one. You felt confident after you had done it 100 times and figured out where the hard parts were. The doing came first. The confidence followed. Building something of your own works exactly the same way. And most people don't notice this part. The version of the business in your head, the one you've been imagining for months or years, is not the version that actually succeeds. The real version gets shaped by reality, by customers who want something slightly different than you expected, by a service that works better than a product, by feedback that redirects everything. You cannot learn any of that without starting. So what does starting actually look like? In most cases, it is smaller than you think. It is telling 3 people what you are doing. It is offering to solve one person's specific problem for a specific price. It is building the simplest possible version of the thing and finding out what happens. Not a business plan, not a logo, not a website with 7 pages. One conversation, one offer, one test. The people who built those small businesses that succeeded were not the most prepared. They were the most willing to move before they had all the answers. And there's a word for that. It is not recklessness, it is just decisiveness. This next part is important, and I think it changes how you look at selling. Most people, when they think about building a business, focus intensely on the thing they are selling, the product, the service, the deliverable. They spend a lot of energy making it better, more complete, more polished, and they assume that if they make it good enough, the customers will come. But that is not actually how people buy things. What people buy is a result, a change, a better version of their situation. They are not buying the thing itself. They are buying what the thing does for them. Think about why someone hires a financial advisor. Not because they find spreadsheets interesting, because they want to feel less anxious about money and more confident about the future. Think about why someone pays for a meal delivery service, not for the food itself.
for the feeling of having one less stressful thing to deal with in a busy week. The thing and the result are related, but they are not the same. And most businesses communicate around the thing when they should be communicating around the result. This matters for how you talk about what you do. The moment you start describing your offer in terms of what it actually changes for someone, not just what it is, something shifts. People understand it faster. They see themselves in it. They feel like you understand their problem. And feeling understood is often the thing that turns someone from a skeptic into a customer. So when you think about whatever it is you might offer, the question to keep asking is not what is this? It is what does this do for someone? What is their life like before they work with you, and what is it like after? If you can describe that gap clearly, you have already done most of the selling.
There is a theme that runs through all of those stories about people who built small businesses from scratch. It is not hustle. It is not grinding through pain and sacrifice. The theme is actually something much quieter. They built lives they did not want to escape from. That sounds obvious when you say it out loud, but think about how rarely it actually shows up as the goal. Most conversations about building something are about making money, hitting revenue, reaching a number. And there's nothing wrong with money, but if money is the only goal, you can end up building something that pays you well and still feels exactly like the thing you were trying to leave. A freelancer with 12 clients and no time off. A consultant who is always available because every client expects it. A person who built their own business and somehow ended up with a worse schedule than their old job. Freedom is actually the goal, not a life with no work or no responsibility, but a life where your time is mostly yours, where the work you do connects to something you care about, where you have enough money and enough choice over how you spend your days. That is a specific kind of design. It does not happen by accident. It requires making decisions about what kind of work you take, how much you charge, how many clients you want, what you are and are not willing to do. Most people skip that part. They build toward revenue without thinking about the structure of the life they are building toward. And then they reach the revenue and realize something still feels off. The freedom they were chasing is not there, and they cannot figure out why. I think about this a lot when I see people exhausted by the businesses they built. They were not unlucky, they were just solving the wrong problem. The goal was never just to make money. The goal was to make money in a way that gives you back your time. Those are related, but they are not the same. And if you lose track of the second part, you can end up very successfully miserable. Here is where I want to bring it all together. Think about the version of you that has been watching opportunities pass, that has been telling yourself you need more money to start, more time to plan, more experience before you feel qualified, more clarity before you take a step. And now look at the pattern underneath that. You have been treating starting as something that happens at the end of a preparation process, when everything is lined up, when the conditions are right, when you feel confident enough, when the risk feels small enough. But starting is not the thing that waits for conditions to align. Starting is what creates the conditions. You do not get clear by thinking more. You get clear by doing something and learning from it. You do not get confident by preparing more. You get confident by getting your hands on the real thing and discovering what you can actually handle. Every person in those stories figured this out, not because they were brave in some extraordinary way, but because at some point they got tired of waiting and made a small move. And that small move revealed something that no amount of planning could have. The plan changed. The market was different than expected. The thing that looked hard turned out to be manageable. The thing that looked easy turned out to be the actual challenge. And they adjusted. That is the process. It is not glamorous. It is not the version you see in business highlight reels. But it is the version that actually works for regular people with regular lives and no outside funding and no famous connections. Now, I want to come back to the question I left open at the beginning.
Why do people who genuinely want to build something different spend years thinking about it and never start? It is not the money. The real cases prove that over and over. Hundreds of businesses under $1,000, many under $200. It is not the experience. Most people who built those businesses were not experts in a traditional sense. They were skilled, and they found people who needed that skill. It is not the idea. The idea is almost never the bottleneck. What is actually in the way is a story about what starting requires, about how much you need before you are allowed to begin, about how much risk is reasonable to take, about what it means if it does not work, about whether someone like you, with your specific circumstances, actually gets to have a different life. That story is very quiet. It runs in the background, and it is effective precisely because it never feels like fear. It feels like being reasonable, like being responsible, like waiting for the right time. But waiting for the right time is just fear with better manners. The shift is not a mindset shift. I want to be honest about that, because I think the word mindset has been stretched to cover too much. The shift is a behavioral one. It is doing something small before you feel ready and discovering that the world does not end. That is it. That is the whole thing. You do not need to believe in yourself fully before you start. You just need to take one step that is small enough to be survivable if it fails, and meaningful enough to teach you something. And then take the next one. I am not going to end this by telling you to quit your job tomorrow. That is not the point. And honestly, it is not the lesson. The lesson is much smaller than that. This week, there is probably something you already know how to do that a specific person in your life needs help with. Not help in the sense of a favor, help in the sense of a real problem that has real consequences for them and that your knowledge or skill could actually solve. Write that down. Not a business plan, just that one thing. Then think about who specifically would pay to have that problem solved. Not a category of people, a specific person, or a specific kind of person you could describe in one sentence. What is their day like? What is frustrating them? What would change for them if you helped? Write that down too. Now you have the beginning of something. Not a business yet, the seed of one. The next step is not building a website. It is talking to one person, describing what you could do for them, listening to what they say back. If there is a real problem there that you can actually help with, ask if they would pay for it. That is the whole test, not a pitch, a conversation. What you learn from that conversation is more valuable than 3 months of planning, because now the feedback is real. Now you are working with something true instead of something imagined. This is how most of those stories actually started, not with a launch, with a conversation. There was something one person in those stories said that has stayed with me. She said that the version of her life she had been waiting for was not something she could build toward from the outside. She had to make a small move toward it and let the path clarify from there. I think that is right. You do not need to have it all figured out. You just need to take the next honest step, and then the one after that. That's the whole thing. That is what the $100 startup actually means, not a $100 budget. The idea that the starting cost of a different life is smaller than you have been told, that the thing standing between where you are and something better is not money, not time, not experience. It is the first move, and the first move is always smaller than the fear around it. If this changed how you see things, the next one on this channel will probably be worth your time too.